Hello Year 11 and welcome to your walking talking mock for Romeo and Juliet. Now before we begin looking at the extract, I'd like you to write your generic introduction paragraph for this response. This is something that you should have prepared during your English lessons with your teacher. So if your teacher could please now pause the video to allow you time to write your introduction. Now that you've written your introduction, let's start taking a look at the extract. Before we look at the extract itself, let's have a look at highlighting the key words and phrases from the summary. So this extract is taken from Act 5, Scene 2 of Romeo and Juliet. And at this point in the play, Friar John has returned unsuccessfully from trying to deliver Friar Lawrence's letter to Romeo. Before we go any further, can you please use your highlighter and identify key words and phrases from the summary and task. So hopefully your highlighting will look similar to mine. You'll see that I've highlighted Act 5, Scene 2, so I'm very clear in my response that this is something that's occurring towards the end of our play. And we're going to be talking about that detailed, crucial letter that Friar Lawrence has written to Romeo, explaining that quite bizarre plan that he has concocted for Juliet to feign death. But crucially, this letter has not been delivered to Romeo. So start thinking about the implications of that letter not being delivered and add further annotations to your extract. Now let's take a look at the task. What is it we're actually being asked to do? Well, it says to us, starting with this extract, explore how Shakespeare presents fate as controlling characters. And we need to write about how Shakespeare presents this to us in the extract and also how Shakespeare presents fate in the play as a whole. So again, take a few seconds and highlight the key words on the task. So again, compare your highlighting to mine. You'll see that I've highlighted the word how. So I need to be very clear in my response to talk about the methods that Shakespeare uses to present fate as controlling characters. And I also need to use plenty of evidence from the extract, and I also need to reference other areas of the play where he demonstrates fate as controlling characters as well. So before we start looking at the body of the extract itself, I would like you to quickly annotate what you have highlighted already. So, for example, if we take returned unsuccessfully and deliver Friar Lawrence's letter to Romeo, some ideas that we could consider writing about. Why haven't they been able to deliver this letter to Romeo? What form has fate taken here, and how is it intervened? So remember, Friar John's gone off to try and deliver this letter to Romeo. He's taken another brother with him, and then they've got caught up in a household, and they've been kept there because of the plague that's running rife in the city of Verona. So we could argue here that fate has taken the form of the pestilence, the plague, and it's actually prevented them delivering this crucial letter to Romeo. And then let's think about how we can link that contextually and think about, well, what epidemic was present in Elizabethan times? So in Shakespeare's own time, what epidemic was present and having a massive impact on the population? And also, what's the potential impact of this letter not being delivered? Okay, so if you think about what that letter contains, it contains details of that extraordinary plan that Friar Lawrence has concocted. And of course, if it's not delivered, Romeo won't know that the death that Juliet is displaying is only a fake death. You know, he won't know that she's going to be waking up from this. So if you think about how the audience would be watching this series of events unfold, and think about the how tension and drama and suspense would be heightened by the fact that, you know, they know that this letter has this really important content, but they also know from the prologue that these two lovers will take their life. So they're now getting that impression that, you know, events are very quickly unfolding in front of them that's going to lead to our lovers' eventual doom. Now let's go back down to the bottom of our sheet and start thinking about how we can form an argument. So, can we argue that Shakespeare is inviting us, his audience, to question whether their tragic deaths were predetermined and how far they were decided by Romeo and Juliet's own impulsive actions? And also, we need to think about where else in the play we can reference. So what other scenes can you think of where fate is obviously present? So you might think, oh, actually, I know, for example, that there are references to fate in the prologue. I know that I can reference fate perhaps in Act 1, Scene 1. If you remember, the Capulet servant is out delivering invitations to the Capulet ball, but this servant is illiterate. You know, he can't read what's on these invitations, and he just happens to meet Romeo, and Romeo then becomes aware that this ball is taking place at the Capulet mansion and thinks, right, well, I'm going to potentially go along to that because, you know, it gives him that opportunity where he might catch sight of his then love, Rosaline. So you can argue here that fate has intervened and brought Romeo and the Capulet servant together. If they hadn't met at that point, perhaps Romeo wouldn't have gone to the Capulet ball and therefore would not have seen Juliet, and so on and so on. Okay, now let's start taking a look at the body of the extract, and feel free to start making your own independent annotations by all means. So let's start with making sure we understand what's going on in this scene. So on the left hand side of the screen, you'll see that you have the extract as you have in front of you on your sheet. On the right hand side, we have a translation. Okay, so this is Friar John speaking. So he says, I went to find another poor friar from your order to accompany me. He was here in this city visiting the sick. When I found him, the town health officials suspected that we were both in a house that had been hit with the plague. They quarantined the house, sealed up the doors, refused to let us out. Couldn't go to Mantua because I was stuck there. Okay, and Friar Lawrence questions him, then who took my letter to Romeo? And then moving on, Friar John confirms, I couldn't send it. Here it is. And he gives Friar Lawrence the letter. I couldn't get a messenger to bring it to you either because they were scared of spreading the infection. And then Friar Lawrence responds, what bad luck. By my brotherhood, the letter was not just a nice greeting. It was full of very important information. It's very dangerous that it hasn't been sent. Friar John, go and get me an iron crowbar, bring it straight back to my cell. Okay, now let's find some quotes from the extract that we can use to prove our argument that fate is controlling characters. Okay, everyone. Now, let's find some quotes from the extract that we can use to prove our argument that fate is intervening and controlling our characters. Going to start with a 4-word quote. Infectious pestilence did reign. Now I'm going to say this is fate intervening dramatically in the form of the plague within the city. And what I would like you to think about is how many devices you can identify within that 4-word quote. So I'm going to ask your teachers to pause the video for 1 minute, and I'm going to ask you guys to identify the different word classes that are present within that 4-word phrase. So pause the video now and then pop it back on in a minute's time, and then we'll compare. So hopefully you've come up with something along these lines. And what we need to do, remember, is talk a lot about a little. So let's see how we could think about combining that into our writing. So here I'm going to talk about the combination of the adjective infectious, describing the noun pestilence, and the use of the powerful verb reign. And I'm going to think, well, that signals how virulent, fatal and prevalent this epidemic was. And then I'm going to have a think and think, can I make any sort of contextual link here? Well, yes, I can, because remember, the contemporary audience, the Elizabethan audience, would have been able to connect very easily with this idea of a fatal plague. So I'm going to ask your teachers again to pause the video to allow you to finish off your annotations for that phrase, and then we're going to move on to our next piece of evidence that we're going to analyse. Okay, I'm now going to have a think about how fate is placing obstacles in Friar John's way. So you'll see I've highlighted sealed up the doors, would not let us forth, and stayed. And I'm going to argue that this is fate placing unexpected obstacles in Friar John's way. So it's a repeated idea. Okay, so I can argue that this is Shakespeare emphasising that they're trapped, okay, with these phrases, and this clearly conveys that they are unable to move or escape this situation. The next thing I'd like you to explore is Friar Lawrence's question. So, who bare my letter then to Romeo? I'd like your teachers to give you half a minute to make some independent annotations, and then we'll see how yours compare to mine. So here I've just annotated that this is a demanding question in response to this dramatic twist. And then let's think about if we can comment on this structurally. Now remember, you as the audience watching this play have known the outcome, you've known the end of the play from the very, very beginning when the prologue is read to you by the chorus. So remember, you have Shakespeare using that dramatic irony where you know everything but the characters don't. So if we already know that Romeo and Juliet are going to die at the end of the play, we at this point would start to feel an increase in tension, wouldn't we? We become aware that the play is approaching its end. We start to realise that actually it's this letter, this crucial letter that isn't delivered to Romeo that's going to ultimately lead to the deaths of our lovers. And let's now highlight how Friar John responds. So you'll see I've highlighted I could not send it, nor get, fearful, and infection. So if I could please ask you to highlight that, and then let's start thinking about how we can comment on the use of these negative adverbs, not and nor. So remember, these will confirm Friar Lawrence's fears that fate's intervention in the form of this fearful infection has interfered, has scuppered his plan. So without that letter being delivered, Romeo is not going to know about that extraordinary plan that he has concocted. The next thing I'd like you to look at is unhappy fortune, exclamation mark. So if you could please highlight that, and I'd like you to form your annotations in response to these 4 questions. So firstly, what method is this? Unhappy fortune. Secondly, what's emphasised by the use of punctuation? Thirdly, How could you link it to other famous examples of this method elsewhere in the play? And fourthly, how could you link to other references to fortune? So perhaps consider what Romeo cries out in Act 3, Scene 1 after the deaths of Mercutio and Tybalt. So teachers, if I could please ask you to pause the video for a minute or so to give your students time to complete their annotations for Unhappy Fortune. Okay, what I'd like you to do now is think about how you can use those 4 annotations that you should have for Unhappy Fortune and how you can start to put that into a paragraph in your essay. So let's just have a look at this example that I have done for Unhappy Fortune. So remember, when we're writing, we're trying to write a lot about a little. So I am going to argue that Friar Lawrence's utter dismay is clear. His exclamation of the oxymoron, in quotes, unhappy fortune, explores the idea that he believes that this event has happened by unlucky chance, in brackets, fate. The negative adjective unhappy, in combination with the positive noun fortune, which we normally associate with good luck, reflects back to the fate foretold in the prologue, in quotes, fatal loins, star-crossed lovers, and death-marked love. And if you thought I had finished, you're wrong. I've still got more to say. I am going to argue that this also echoes Romeo's cry of being, quotes, fortune's fool in Act 3, Scene 1. He refers specifically to his unluckiness in being forced to kill his new wife's cousin, in brackets Tybalt, thereby getting himself banished, and recalls to the audience the sense of fate that hangs over the whole play. Fate appears to be conspiring against Romeo and Juliet. And now, Year 11, I'm almost ready to hand over to you. But before doing so, please can I ask you to highlight these quotations. The letter was not nice but full of charge of dear import. Neglecting it may do much danger. Go, get, and bring it straight unto my cell. Think about how you could use these quotations to support your ongoing argument that fate is controlling characters. Also, consider whether you can link these quotes back to the foretelling of their deaths in the prologue. And also consider how quickly events are now moving and the urgency with which Friar Lawrence commands Friar John. Teachers, if you could please pause the video to allow your students time to complete their annotations. And Year 11, do remember that this is just a range of quotations from the extract that you might want to use in your response. If there are other ideas which you want to explore from the extract or the wider play as a whole, then naturally, please feel free to do so.